stood in my penthouse overlooking the city, watching the royal wedding announcement broadcast across every screen in the kingdom. The crown prince stood tall and composed, his hand resting protectively on a small boy's shoulder. The child couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with dark curls and eyes that held a fear no child should carry. Beside the prince stood a woman in an elegant gown, smiling for cameras with practiced perfection. She wore my life like a costume, stood in my place like she'd earned it, touched my son like he belonged to her. "That's my son," I whispered to the empty room. "And that throne was built on my blood. My name is Sofia Castellano, 28 years old, self-made business owner, former street survivor, current ghost seeking resurrection." The kingdom knew me as a successful entrepreneur who'd built a logistics empire across 3 countries. What they didn't know was that I'd been erased once, stolen as a child, replaced, forgotten. They thought I was nobody, a woman who'd climbed from nothing through hard work and luck. They had no idea I was the missing Castellano heiress, the daughter everyone had stopped looking for 23 years ago. But I remembered everything now, and I was done being erased. The broadcast continued. Reporters asked about the wedding date, the child's name, future plans. The woman, Celeste Harrington as she called herself now, answered with appropriate modesty while making sure cameras captured her from every flattering angle. She'd stolen more than my place. She'd stolen my child, my identity, my entire existence. And she'd done it with the same cold calculation she'd used 23 years ago when she first decided that being my father's assistant wasn't enough, that she wanted everything my mother had, everything I was meant to inherit. I turned away from the screens, walking to my safe where I kept the documents I'd been collecting for 18 months. DNA results, financial records, witness statements, medical files, police reports from 2 decades ago that had been buried or lost. Evidence assembled piece by careful piece. My phone rang. My assistant, Marco, the private investigator, confirmed it. The child's birth certificate is falsified. Hospital records show you as the biological mother. They never even bothered to forge genetics. They just paid people to look the other way. And the prince's medical records. Traumatic brain injury from a car accident 3 years ago. Selective amnesia. He doesn't remember you. Doesn't remember the pregnancy. Nothing before the accident. "How convenient," I said softly. Because it hadn't been an accident. I knew that now. Just like my kidnapping hadn't been random. Just like my mother's death hadn't been natural grief. "When do we move?" Marco asked. "Soon. But not yet. I need one more piece." I hung up, staring at the documents. 23 years of stolen life. 3 years of stolen motherhood. An entire kingdom that had no idea their future queen was a fraud built on kidnapping and murder. They'd taken everything from me. Now I'd take it all back. The memories came in dreams sometimes. Fragments of a childhood I'd spent years trying to remember. I was 5 years old, playing in our estate gardens while my mother read nearby. My father was in the city, running the empire he'd built from nothing. Real estate, technology investments, international holdings worth billions. I remembered my mother's laugh, her perfume, the way she'd sing Italian lullabies my grandmother had taught her. I remembered feeling safe, loved, like the world was full of good things and nothing could hurt me. I remembered the woman who worked for my father, his assistant, quiet, efficient, always watching. She'd smile at me sometimes, but the smile never reached her eyes. My mother had been polite to her but distant, as if she sensed something wrong beneath the professional surface. That woman was Celeste, the monster who'd become my stepmother, who'd orchestrated my disappearance, who'd comforted my grieving father while secretly having already murdered his daughter's future. My last clear memory before everything shattered was of playing hide and seek with my nanny. I'd hidden in the garden shed. Someone had opened the door. Not my nanny. A man I didn't recognize. A cloth over my face. Chemical smell. Darkness. When I woke up, I was in a windowless room. Terrified. Calling for my mother. Nobody came. Not for days. Not ever. I was 5 years old, and my life as Sofia Castellano ended in that moment. What came after was survival. And survival taught me patience. How to wait. How to plan. How to become the weapon they never saw coming. 23 years ago, my father was 42 years old and one of the wealthiest men in the country. Self-made. Started with nothing, built real estate developments that transformed entire cities, invested in tech companies before anyone understood their value, created an empire worth $4 billion. My mother, Isabella, came from old money. European aristocracy that had fallen on hard times. She'd married my father for love, not money. Her family had disapproved of the American businessman with no pedigree. But she'd been happy. Genuinely, visibly happy. Their daughter, me, was the center of their world. Photos from those years show a small girl with dark curls and bright eyes. Always laughing, always confident. A child who'd never known fear or insecurity. Who'd grown up believing the world was safe and people were good. Celeste came into our lives when I was 3. My father's new executive assistant. 26 years old, attractive in a cold way. Brilliant with numbers and logistics. She'd come with perfect references, impeccable credentials, and a work ethic that impressed my father immediately. What we didn't know, what nobody knew, was that she'd spent 2 years researching our family before applying for the position. That she'd studied my mother's routines, my father's schedule, my life. That she'd decided long before meeting us that she wanted everything my mother had. The job was never the goal. It was access, position, proximity to wealth and power she'd never achieve alone. My mother was the obstacle. I was the problem. And Celeste was patient enough to solve both. The kidnapping happened on a Tuesday afternoon in May. I was playing in the garden with my nanny while my mother was inside taking a phone call. My father was in meetings downtown. Security was present but not overwhelming. We lived in a safe neighborhood, had gates and guards, but my parents wanted me to have a normal childhood. The man who took me had worked as a gardener for 3 weeks. Background checked. Cleared. Trusted. What nobody knew was that Celeste had paid him $50,000 and provided him with false credentials that passed security screening. He'd grabbed me during a moment when my nanny was distracted. Drugged me with chloroform. Carried me out in a lawn equipment bag. Drove away in a service vehicle that belonged on the property. Nobody questioned it until my nanny realized I was missing 30 minutes later. By then I was miles away, unconscious, heading toward a fate Celeste had arranged months in advance. She'd hired people through criminal networks. Paid in untraceable cash. Created layers of separation so nothing would lead back to her. She'd planned every detail with the same efficiency she brought to managing my father's schedule. The police investigation was massive. FBI involvement. Media coverage. Ransom demands that never came. False leads. Dead ends. My parents offered $10 million for information leading to my recovery. Nothing worked. Because Celeste controlled information from inside the house. She had access to investigation details, could redirect resources, could ensure certain leads were never followed. She was helping my grieving parents while actively sabotaging their daughter's rescue. And nobody suspected the loyal assistant who worked tirelessly beside my devastated father. My mother died 8 months after I was taken. Official cause. Heart failure. Actual cause. Grief so profound it destroyed her will to live. She'd stopped eating properly. Stopped sleeping. Spent every waking hour coordinating search efforts, following leads, refusing to accept that I might be dead. My father told me years later, after I found him again, that my mother had become a ghost long before her heart stopped. That she'd wander the house at night, going into my room, touching my things, talking to me like I might hear her somewhere. That she'd aged a decade in 8 months. The day before she died, she'd told my father she felt like someone in the house was lying. That something about the investigation felt wrong. That maybe they should look closer at people they trusted. She died that night. Heart failure, the doctors said. Broken heart, my father said. Murder, I knew, though I could never prove it. Celeste had been in the house. Had brought my mother tea that evening, trying to get her to eat something. Had been the last person to see her alive before my father found her body. Convenient, suspicious, unprovable. Celeste was very good at creating situations that benefited her while leaving no evidence. My mother's death eliminated the person most likely to keep searching forever. Most likely to eventually uncover truth. 3 months later, my father married Celeste. Not for love, he was still destroyed by grief. But she'd been there. Constant. Supportive. The only person who seemed to understand his pain. And he was drowning, needed someone, couldn't survive alone. She'd orchestrated everything perfectly. Murdered his daughter's future. Killed his wife. Married him. All within a year. After the wedding, Celeste moved quickly to secure her position. She convinced my father to adopt her biological daughter, a child she claimed was from a previous relationship. The girl, Natalia, was 4 years old, quiet, easily molded. Convenient timing, really, for a daughter to suddenly need adopting right after becoming a billionaire's wife. But my father's will remained unchanged. Everything was still left to me. Even though I was presumed dead, even though 7 years had passed with no evidence I was alive, legally I was still his heir. If I ever returned, the empire would be mine. Celeste would get nothing beyond her position as widow. This drove her insane. She'd murdered and married her way to wealth, but it was all temporary. Conditional. Subject to my ghost returning. She became obsessed with having me declared legally dead so Natalia could inherit. But my father refused. Absolutely refused. Some part of him couldn't accept that I was gone forever. So Celeste realized she needed to make sure I stayed gone. Not just missing. Permanently, undeniably destroyed. She needed to eliminate any possibility of my return. Which meant she needed to know where I was. Needed to finish what she'd started when I was 5. She contacted the same criminal network. Offered more money. Demanded updates. And learned something that shattered her careful plans. The child she'd ordered disappeared was no longer in their custody. That 10 years ago, at age 15, I'd escaped. I was alive. Somewhere. Growing up. Potentially remembering. Potentially coming back. Her nightmare had come true. The daughter she'd tried to erase was out there. Unknown, uncontrollable. A threat that could surface any moment and destroy everything she'd built. After the man took me at age 5, I was sold to a human trafficking ring that specialized in children. They kept me in various locations, moving frequently, always controlled. The first years were horror I still don't speak about. Survival meant shutting down emotions. Becoming numb. Learning to obey. They broke my spirit systematically. Told me I'd been abandoned. That my parents didn't want me. That nobody would look for me. That I was nothing. Property. Replaceable. I believed them because I was 5, then 6, then 7, and nobody came. But somewhere deep inside I held on to fragments. My mother's face. My father's laugh. A big house with gardens. A life that felt like a dream but must have been real because the details were too specific to imagine. At age 10, I was moved to a new location. They decided I was old enough for different work. But the security was slightly less intense. They underestimated how smart desperation makes you. How carefully a child can observe when survival depends on noticing patterns. I escaped at 15. Middle of the night. Stole money from a guard who'd fallen asleep drunk. Ran until my legs gave out. Hid in a shipping container that was being loaded for international transport. Ended up in another country, illegal, undocumented, terrified. But free. For the first time in 10 years I was free. And freedom, even when you're 15 and alone and traumatized, is worth everything. Living on streets in a foreign country taught me more than any school. I learned to spot danger. To trust nobody. To steal without getting caught. To sleep light. To fight when necessary. To become invisible when survival required it. I was small, fast. Fluent in 3 languages from different captors. I could pick pockets, find shelter, avoid police. I survived through winter, through hunger, through every kind of fear. And I refused to die. Refused to let them win. Refused to be another forgotten child who disappeared without justice. At 16, I tried working legitimate jobs. But without documents, options were limited. I cleaned restaurants, sorted warehouse inventory, did anything that paid cash and didn't ask questions, saved every penny, slept in hostels or abandoned buildings. I also started trying to remember who I'd been before. The fragments were clearer now that I was older. I remembered the name Sophia, remembered a big house, a woman singing Italian, a city skyline that I thought might be home. But I didn't know where home was. Didn't have enough details to search effectively. And I was terrified that going to authorities would send me back to traffickers somehow. Trust was impossible after 10 years of betrayal. So I stayed hidden, kept surviving, kept working, and told myself that someday when I was strong enough, smart enough, powerful enough, I'd figure out who I'd been and take back what was stolen. My life changed at 17 when I tried to steal from a man outside a restaurant. He was well-dressed, distracted, had an expensive watch. Easy target. I was fast, usually successful. But he caught my wrist mid-theft, turned, and instead of being angry, he looked sad. "You're skilled," he said in accented English. "But hungry people make mistakes. Come inside first. Then we'll talk." His name was Antonio Russo. He and his wife, Clara, owned the restaurant. They were in their 50s, childless, kind in a way I'd forgotten existed. They didn't call police, didn't lecture, just fed me, then offered me work. Legal work, with payment in cash until I could get documents. "Everyone deserves a chance," Clara said simply. "You're just a child." I wasn't a child anymore. Trauma ages you faster than years. But I accepted because I was tired. So tired of running. And for the first time since I was 5, someone was offering help without expecting something terrible in return. They let me sleep in their apartment above the restaurant. Gave me clothes, fed me, treated me like family. And slowly, carefully I started to heal. Started to believe that maybe people could be good. That maybe the world wasn't entirely evil. I stayed with them for 2 years. Worked hard. Learned their business. And when I turned 19, they helped me get legal documents. Not my real identity, but a working identity that let me function. They saved my life. Gave me the foundation to build everything that came after. And I loved them for it. 20 I started my own business. Small logistics company connecting manufacturers with international distributors. I had contacts from street life, understood shipping routes, spoke multiple languages, and knew how to negotiate from years of survival. The business grew fast. I was aggressive, smart, willing to work 20-hour days. Within 3 years I had operations in 5 countries. By 25 I was managing contracts worth millions. I'd built an empire from nothing, driven by the same determination that had kept me alive on streets. But I never forgot. Never stopped searching for my past. I hired private investigators to look into kidnapped children from 20 years ago. Searched databases. Followed leads that went nowhere. The fragments of memory weren't enough. I couldn't find myself. Until I found my father by accident. A business magazine article about billionaire developers included a photo of him at a charity gala. Older, better, but unmistakably the man from my fractured memories. The article mentioned his daughter who'd been kidnapped 23 years ago. Mentioned my mother who'd died from grief. Mentioned that he'd never remarried after losing his second wife to cancer, which was a lie. I knew Celeste existed. Had seen her in photos from society events. The article included his company name, his city. Enough information to finally find him. To confirm what I'd always suspected. I was Sofia Castellano. I'd been stolen. And the woman who'd married my father had something to do with it. I started investigating properly then. Hired experts. Spent hundreds of thousands of dollars uncovering truth. And piece by piece over 18 months, I learned what Celeste had done. What she'd stolen. What she'd destroyed. My investigation revealed patterns that proved intentional destruction. Celeste had been methodically positioning herself from the beginning. The kidnapper who'd taken me died in prison 3 years after my disappearance, stabbed by another inmate. Convenient. The criminal network that had held me disbanded 10 years ago under mysterious circumstances right after I escaped. Most members dead or missing. Evidence destroyed. Another convenient erasure. My mother's death. Medical records showed unusual toxin levels in her blood work. Tests that had been buried in files, never investigated because everyone assumed grief had killed her. The financial trail was most damning. Celeste had received large cash payments into offshore accounts in the months before my kidnapping. Payments that matched withdrawals from accounts linked to the criminal network. She'd literally paid to have me disappeared. But proving this legally was nearly impossible. Too much time had passed. Evidence had been destroyed. Witnesses were dead. The only solid proof I had was DNA showing I was Sofia Castellano. That I was alive. That I could reclaim my identity. Which would be enough to strip Celeste of everything, if I approached it correctly. If I was patient. If I built a case so airtight that even her wealth and connections couldn't save her. But then I'd met the prince. And everything became infinitely more complicated. I met Crown Prince Alessandro 2 years ago at a charity gala. I'd been invited as a successful entrepreneur, someone who'd built business from nothing. He'd been there as royal obligation, looking bored and distant until his security detail was called away for an emergency. When his car was hit by a drunk driver leaving the event, I was the one who pulled him from wreckage, called ambulance, stayed with him until help arrived. He'd been conscious, shaken, grateful. "You saved my life," he'd said. I'd left before his people could properly thank me. Didn't want attention. Didn't want connection to royalty when I was trying to stay hidden while investigating my past. But he'd found me weeks later. Showed up at my office with flowers and determination. "Have dinner with me," he'd said. "I need to thank you properly. Plus, I'm curious about the woman who runs logistics empire and pulls princes from burning vehicles without waiting for credit." I should have said no. Should have maintained distance. But Alessandro was charming, intelligent, genuinely interested in my work rather than my appearance. And I was lonely. Years of survival had left me isolated, unable to trust, unable to connect. He made me feel human again. Like I was more than the sum of my trauma. Like maybe I could have something normal. Something good. So I said yes to dinner. Then yes to another. Then yes to months of carefully building something that felt impossibly like love. Alessandro didn't know about my past. I told him I'd grown up in poverty, built my business through hard work, had no family. All technically true if you ignored the kidnapping, trafficking, and stolen inheritance parts. He told me about royal pressure. Expectations of duty over personal desire. The loneliness of living in public while having no real privacy. We understood each other's isolation even though our circumstances were completely different. 6 months into the relationship, I told him I was pregnant. Unplanned. Shocking. Terrifying for both of us. His family would never approve. I wasn't aristocracy, had no pedigree, brought nothing strategic to alliance. "I don't care," he said. "I love you. We'll make it work. I'll talk to my family. We'll figure this out together." He proposed the next day. Simple, private, perfect. "Marry me. Not because of duty or pregnancy. Because you're the first real thing I've had in years. 'Cause I love you. Because I want to build a life with you." Said yes. And for the first time since I was 5 years old I felt safe. Protected. Like maybe I could stop running. Stop surviving. Just live. I should have known better. Should have known that safety was an illusion. That the universe wasn't done punishing me. That Celeste's shadow was still hunting me even though I didn't know it yet. Because while I was falling in love and planning a future, my stepmother was discovering that the missing Castellano heiress was alive, was successful, was about to marry into royalty, and was therefore the biggest threat Celeste had ever faced. Alessandro insisted on meeting my adoptive parents, Antonio and Clara, who he believed were my biological family. They were nervous, intimidated by royalty, but welcoming. They loved me, wanted me happy. And Alessandro charmed them within an hour, helping Clara in the kitchen and discussing food with Antonio like a normal person rather than a prince. "He's good for you," Clara told me later. "I see you smile now. Really smile. I haven't seen that before." She was right. Alessandro had broken through walls I'd built from trauma, made me believe in good things again, in futures that weren't just survival but actual happiness. We planned to announce the engagement after I told my biological father the truth. I'd finally worked up courage to approach him, to prove my identity, to reclaim the life Celeste had stolen. Alessandro knew this was important to me, supported it completely. "Your father deserves to know you're alive," he said. "And you deserve to take back what's yours. We'll do this right. Legal, public, undeniable. Then we'll get married and raise our son together." Our son. We'd learned I was carrying a boy. Alessandro was thrilled, already planning nurseries and talking about teaching him to ride horses. Already completely in love with a child who hadn't been born yet. I was 7 months pregnant, happy, planning to reveal truth to my father within weeks. Everything felt possible. Like maybe trauma didn't define you forever. Like maybe stolen lives could be rebuilt. Then Celeste learned who I was. And everything shattered again. I don't know exactly how Celeste discovered my identity. Maybe through private investigators monitoring my father's communications. Maybe through society connections who recognized similarities between photos of missing 5-year-old Sophia and current 26-year-old me. Maybe through medical records if she'd been tracking pregnancy announcements among women connected to the royal family. However she learned, she moved fast. Within days of discovering I was alive, pregnant, and engaged to the crown prince, she'd formulated a plan to eliminate me permanently. The car accident happened on a rainy evening. Alessandro and I were driving back from dinner, discussing names for the baby. Traffic was light. Roads were slick but manageable. I was careful, driving slowly, protective of the life I carried. The truck hit us from the side. Deliberately. Precisely. Sending our car spinning into guardrail. I remember Alessandro's hand grabbing mine. The sound of metal tearing. Glass shattering. Rain. Darkness. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital. Severe concussion. Broken ribs. Extensive bruising. But alive. And still pregnant. Somehow, miraculously, the baby had survived impact. Alessandro was in a coma. Traumatic brain injury. The doctors said he might wake up. Might not. And if he did, there could be permanent damage. Memory loss. Cognitive impairment. They couldn't predict. I asked about the other car. The truck that hit us. Police said they were investigating but had no leads. The vehicle had been stolen, abandoned, driver gone. Probably drunk driving. Probably accident. Nothing suspicious. But I knew better. I'd spent years learning to recognize threats. And this was no accident. While I was hospitalized, everything fell apart. I went into early labor from trauma. Gave birth at 34 weeks. A small boy with dark hair and his father's eyes. He was alive. Breathing. Perfect. They let me hold him for 10 minutes before taking him to NICU for monitoring. "He's strong," the nurse said. "He'll be fine. You both will." I named him Lorenzo. For the grandfather who didn't know yet that I existed. For the legacy I'd spent years trying to reclaim. For the future I thought we'd have. They moved me to recovery. Told me to rest. Told me Lorenzo was stable. Told me Alessandro was still unconscious but responding to stimuli. Told me everything was going to be okay. I should have known better. Should have insisted on guards. Should have been more paranoid. But I was exhausted, traumatized, barely functioning. And I made the fatal mistake of believing that hospitals were safe. I woke up 18 hours later to a nurse I'd never seen before standing beside my bed. She seemed nervous. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "They paid me. I didn't know what else to do. I have debts." "What are you talking about?" I tried to sit up. Couldn't. Had been sedated with something. Your baby. They took him. There's a woman downstairs with paperwork claiming she's the mother. Social services believed her. He's gone. Lorenzo. They'd stolen my son. While I was drugged and helpless, they'd literally walked into the hospital and taken him. I tried to fight. Tried to alert authorities. But the paperwork was perfect. Birth certificate listing Natalia Harrington, Celeste's daughter, my stepsister, as Lorenzo's mother. Hospital records that had been falsified. Social services documentation approving the release. I'm his mother. I screamed at nurses, doctors, anyone who'd listen. I gave birth to him. You were here. Ma'am, you need to calm down. You're confused. The head injury. Sometimes trauma causes false memories. The records clearly show. The records are lies. That woman stole my son. But the more I insisted, the more they thought I was mentally unstable. Brain injury. Post-trauma psychosis. Delusions. They sedated me. Kept me hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Treated me like I was dangerous rather than victimized. By the time I convinced them to check DNA, 2 weeks had passed. And when tests came back showing I was Lorenzo's biological mother, Natalia had disappeared. Taken my son somewhere unreachable. Hidden behind Celeste's wealth and connections. Alessandro woke up during the 3rd week. But the head injury had caused selective amnesia. He didn't remember the pregnancy. Didn't remember proposing. Didn't remember me at all. The last year of his life was completely gone. I'm sorry, his doctors told me. His memory may return with time. Or it may not. Traumatic brain injuries are unpredictable. I stood at his bedside, looking at the man I loved, who looked at me like a stranger. Who are you? He asked politely. My heart broke for the 2nd time in 3 weeks. While I was fighting to prove Lorenzo was my son, Celeste and Natalia moved with surgical precision. Natalia appeared at the hospital with falsified documents claiming she was Alessandro's fiancée. That they'd been together for a year. That the accident had happened while they were driving to meet his parents. The royal family, desperate for Alessandro to recover, accepted her story. She was there constantly. Supportive. Caring. Playing the devoted fiancé while Alessandro struggled to rebuild memory. He had no reason to doubt her. No memory to contradict her lies. She told him about their son Lorenzo. Showed him photos. Explained that the baby had been born prematurely after the accident. That she'd been terrified but was so grateful Alessandro and the baby had both survived. Alessandro, confused and vulnerable, accepted the narrative. Believed this woman was his fiancée. Believed the child was his. Believed the life she described was his reality. Meanwhile, I was discharged from the hospital with nothing. No son. No proof that would stand up against Celeste's money and connections. No way to reach Alessandro through his family's security. Just DNA results that proved Lorenzo was mine but couldn't tell me where he was. I went to police. They said it was a civil matter. I went to lawyers. They said fighting the royal family was impossible without overwhelming evidence. I went to my father. But Celeste intercepted. Told him I was a con artist trying to extort money by claiming to be his dead daughter. She'd won. Again. Stolen my son the way she'd stolen my childhood. Erased me the way she'd erased the first 5 years of my life. The first fragments of memory returned 6 months after the accident. I was living in a small apartment, working to rebuild my business, drowning in grief and rage. Then one morning I woke up remembering Alessandro's face. His voice. The feeling of his hand in mine. Not the public figure everyone saw. The private Alessandro who'd loved me. Who'd proposed. Who'd wanted to build a life together. The memories were sharp, undeniable, real. I started writing everything down. Every memory that surfaced. Our first meeting. Conversations. The pregnancy announcement. The proposal. Building evidence of our relationship in my own handwriting before trauma could steal more details. Over the next months, more memories returned. The investigation into my biological identity. The evidence against Celeste. The plan to reveal truth to my father. All of it came back in pieces like solving a puzzle in reverse. And I understood finally what had happened. That the accident hadn't been random. That Celeste had orchestrated it. That stealing Lorenzo wasn't about a child. It was about eliminating the last threat to her stolen empire. She tried to kill me at 5. Tried again at 26. And when I survived both times, she'd stolen everything that mattered instead. My son. My identity. My future. Everything. I could have given up. Should have, probably. The fight seemed impossible. But survival had taught me patience. Had taught me that sometimes you lose battles to win wars. That sometimes revenge requires years of preparation. So I started planning. Again. More carefully this time. 'Cause I was done losing. Finding my biological father took months of careful approach. I couldn't just show up claiming to be his dead daughter. Celeste had already poisoned that well, warned him about con artists. I needed proof so overwhelming that even his grief couldn't deny it. I hired the best forensic genealogists in the country. DNA testing from 3 independent laboratories. Childhood photos enhanced and age progressed by experts. Dental records somehow preserved from before my kidnapping. Every piece of scientific evidence that could prove identity beyond doubt. I also investigated his current life thoroughly. Learned that Celeste's hold on him had weakened after her second attempt on my life. That he'd discovered irregularities in family finances. That he'd started questioning things about my mother's death. He was older now, 65, grieving 2 wives, raising Natalia as his adopted daughter without knowing she was part of the plot against his biological daughter. Still wealthy, still powerful, but tired, worn down by losses. I approached him finally at a charity event. Public setting. Witnesses. No opportunity for Celeste to intercept or control narrative. I handed him a folder. Mr. Castellano, I need 5 minutes of your time. I have information about your daughter Sophia. He looked at me with the wary exhaustion of someone who'd heard hundreds of false claims. I don't have time for this. My daughter died 23 years ago. No, I said quietly. She didn't. She's standing in front of you. And I can prove it. The DNA results were undeniable. 3 independent laboratories. Same conclusion. I was Sophia Castellano, his daughter, alive after 23 years. My father broke down completely, wept like a child, held me with shaking hands. I knew, he kept saying. I always knew you were alive somewhere. Felt it. God, Sophia. What happened to you? I told him everything. The kidnapping, the trafficking, the escape, the years of survival. Building my business, finding him, discovering Celeste's role, meeting Alessandro, the pregnancy, the accident, Lorenzo's theft. That woman, he said, voice shaking with rage. That monster. She was in my home. I trusted her. I married her after your mother died. Oh God, did she kill Isabella too? I think so. But I can't prove it yet. And now she has your son. She stole your child just like she stole you. His expression hardened. We're getting him back. And we're destroying her. Completely. Legally. Publicly. She will lose everything. He hired a team of lawyers. Private investigators. Financial forensic accountants. We started building a case that would dismantle Celeste's life piece by piece. And because my father was wealthy and connected, we had resources Celeste couldn't match forever. We investigated financial crimes, money laundering, tax evasion, the criminal payments she'd made 23 years ago, the falsified documents for Lorenzo's birth, every illegal action she'd ever taken. We gathered evidence carefully, legally, building a case so airtight that even her wealth couldn't save her. And we waited for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came at the royal wedding announcement ceremony. Natalia and Alessandro standing before the kingdom, presenting Lorenzo as their son, planning a future built on lies and stolen lives. I walked into that ceremony flanked by lawyers and my father. Security tried to stop us. But when my father identified himself, billionaire Lorenzo Castellano, major royal family donor, doors opened. We interrupted the ceremony quietly, professionally. No drama. Just legal documents presented to the royal family's council. DNA tests proving I was Lorenzo's biological mother. Evidence proving Natalia had falsified birth certificates. Documentation of the accident that had stolen Alessandro's memory and my son. This woman, I said clearly looking at Natalia, stole my son 3 years ago. Falsified documents to claim him as hers. Presented him to the royal family based on lies. And I have proof of everything. The room went silent. Cameras were present. Broadcasting live to the kingdom. Millions watching. No way to hide truth now. Alessandro looked at me with confusion. I don't understand. Who are you? I'm Sofia Castellano. 3 years ago I pulled you from a car crash. We fell in love. Got pregnant. We were engaged to be married. Then someone staged an accident that gave you amnesia and let them steal our son. I presented medical records showing his selective memory loss. Photos of us together. Pregnancy documentation. The engagement ring he'd given me. Evidence building piece by systematic piece. She's lying. Natalia screamed. She's a con artist. My mother warned me about her. Your mother, my father said coldly, is Celeste Harrington, the woman who kidnapped my 5-year-old daughter 23 years ago and had her sold to human traffickers. We have proof of that too. The evidence presentation took hours. Lawyers for both sides. DNA tests verified by royal physicians. Financial records showing Celeste's payments to criminals. Hospital records proving I'd given birth to Lorenzo. Alessandro's medical files documenting his selective amnesia. Slowly, painfully, Alessandro's memory started breaking through. Triggered by photos. By my voice. By evidence of what we'd been. I remember, he whispered finally. The proposal. Your laugh. Talking about baby names. God, Sophia. What did they do to us? The royal family was devastated. They'd accepted Natalia based on lies. Had been raising Lorenzo without knowing his mother was alive and desperately searching. Had been planning a wedding based on falsified history. But their devastation was nothing compared to what was coming for Celeste and Natalia. Because financial crimes investigation had uncovered everything. Money laundering. Tax evasion. Criminal conspiracy going back 23 years. Police arrested them during the ceremony. Live broadcast. Millions watching. Celeste maintained composure until handcuffs went on. Then she looked at me with pure hatred. You were supposed to die. Both times. How are you still here? Because you underestimated what survival teaches, I said quietly. You thought I was weak, broken, easy to erase. You were wrong. My mother's death was reclassified as murder after forensic review of preserved blood samples showed toxic levels. The kidnapper's prison death was reopened as suspected murder for hire. Everything Celeste had done was being dismantled systematically. Natalia faced kidnapping charges, identity fraud, conspiracy, years in prison, her stolen royal title stripped, her access to wealth eliminated. Her entire life revealed as a performance built on someone else's blood. Celeste was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 3 murders. Kidnapping. Human trafficking conspiracy. Fraud. The judge's words were clear. You destroyed families for personal gain. Killed a mother through poison. Stole a child twice. You will spend the rest of your life paying for those crimes. Natalia received 25 years. Younger, less directly involved in the original crimes, but still guilty of kidnapping Lorenzo, falsifying documents and conspiracy. Still stripped of everything she'd built on lies. I stood in the courtroom and felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just exhaustion. Because justice doesn't erase trauma, doesn't give back stolen years, doesn't undo what was done, but it does restore truth. And truth matters. Alessandro's memory returned fully 6 months after the ceremony. Physical therapy. Counseling. He remembered everything we'd been. Everything we'd planned. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I should have protected you. Protected Lorenzo. You couldn't. Neither of us could. She was too smart. Too ruthless. But it's over now. We married quietly. Private ceremony. Just family. Antonio and Clara. My father. People who'd actually been there through darkness. Lorenzo present, 3 years old, finally understanding who his real mother was. I rebuilt my business. Expanded the logistics empire my father had built. Combined our companies into something that would last generations. Created legitimate power from blood that had been spilled trying to steal it illegitimately. Years later, Celeste tried to write me from prison. Long letter. Apologies and justifications. Explanations of desperation and bad choices. Asking for forgiveness. For understanding. For some acknowledgement that she'd been human too. I burned the letter without reading past the first paragraph. Because some things don't deserve forgiveness. Some actions can't be explained away. Some people don't get redemption arcs. She'd stolen my childhood. Killed my mother. Stolen my son. Erased me twice. And I'd taken everything back. Not through forgiveness. Through evidence, patience, and truth. I didn't steal revenge. I reclaimed what was always mine.